The blazing inferno consumed the small church of Prosperity Creek, its wooden beams crackling like kindling as the flames reached toward the darkening Montana sky. Hannah Dawson stood motionless on the church steps, her eyes reflecting the dancing fire, her black widow's dress billowing in the heat. She made no move to escape as burning debris fell around her, as if the flames that had taken her sanctuary might as well take her too. Wyatt Reeves saw her silhouette against the fire as he rode into town, his horses' hooves thundering against the packed dirt. Without hesitation, he leapt from his mount and raced toward the burning building. The heat was overwhelming, stinging his skin even before he reached the steps. "Madam, you need to get away from there," he shouted, but Hannah remained frozen, transfixed by the destruction before her. A massive beam crashed down inside the church, sending a shower of embers into the night sky. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He bounded up the steps, wrapped his strong arms around Hannah's waist, and pulled her backward just as part of the church facade collapsed where she had been standing. They tumbled down the steps together, Wyatt twisting to take the brunt of the fall. He held her protectively against his chest as they landed in the dirt, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough from the smoke. Hannah looked up at the stranger whose arms encircled her, seeing through her shock a face weathered by sun and wind, kind eyes filled with concern beneath the brim of a dusty hat. "The church," she whispered. "Everything is gone." Montana Territory, 1878. Prosperity Creek had seen better days, but the church had been its heart. Now that heart was burning to ash before the town's very eyes. A crowd had gathered, but no one had noticed Hannah standing so close to danger, no one except the cowboy who had just ridden into their small settlement. Hannah pulled away from Wyatt's grasp, smoothing her soot-stained dress. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what came over me." Wyatt stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. "Name's Wyatt Reeves, madam, just passing through when I saw the blaze." He glanced at her black dress. "Are you all right?" Hannah looked back at the church, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm Hannah Dawson, the widow Dawson as everyone calls me," her voice caught. "That church was where I married my Thomas, where we laid him to rest last winter." The townspeople had begun forming a bucket brigade, though it was clear the church was beyond saving. The local sheriff, a stout man named Ellis, approached them. "Hannah, you should go home. Nothing more to be done here tonight," he nodded at Wyatt. "Obliged for your help, stranger." Wyatt tipped his hat. Just did what needed doing. Hannah hugged herself, suddenly feeling the chill of the night despite the nearby fire. "I have nowhere to go, Sheriff. The parsonage was my home." It was true. After Thomas died, Reverend Parker had offered Hannah the small room adjacent to the church. In exchange, she kept the place clean and helped with Sunday school. Now that too was engulfed in flames. "You can stay at the boarding house," Sheriff Ellis suggested. "Mrs. Hollister always keeps a room open." "I haven't the money," Hannah admitted, her pride almost as painful as her loss. Wyatt cleared his throat. "I was aiming to get a room there myself. Perhaps they'd let me pay for two." Hannah's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly. It's not charity, madam," Wyatt said quickly. "Consider it a loan. Once you're back on your feet, you can settle up." Sheriff Ellis looked between them, clearly relieved to have the problem solved. "That's mighty generous. Hannah, this gentleman saved your life. I reckon you can accept his help a bit longer." Hannah studied Wyatt's face, noting the sincerity in his expression. Her options were limited, and though she'd learned to be wary of men's generosity since becoming a widow, something about this cowboy's straightforward manner put her at ease. "Very well," she agreed reluctantly, "but I will repay you, Mr. Reeves." As they walked toward the boarding house, leaving the burning church behind, Hannah felt a strange sense of liberation mingling with her grief. For a year, she had been trapped in her widowhood, defined by loss and pity. Now, in one night, everything familiar had been stripped away. "What brings you to Prosperity Creek, Mr. Reeves?" she asked, desperate for distraction from her thoughts. Wyatt adjusted his hat. "Cattle drive. I'm scouting ahead for my outfit. The main herd's about 2 days behind me." You're a long way from the usual trails. He smiled slightly. Sharp observation, Mrs. Dawson. There's trouble brewing with some of the bigger outfits further south. My boss thought we might find a clearer path up this way. At the boarding house, Mrs. Hollister fussed over Hannah, providing a clean nightgown and promising to find some spare clothing in the morning. Wyatt arranged for the rooms, and as they parted for the night, Hannah found herself reluctant to be alone. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "thank you. Not just for the room, but for—" She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate her gratitude for being pulled from her trance before the flames. "Get some rest, Mrs. Dawson," he replied gently. "Tomorrow will look brighter, but tomorrow brought new challenges." Hannah awoke to find most of her worldly possessions reduced to ashes. The town council gathered to discuss the church fire, which appeared to have been deliberately set. Tensions were already high in Prosperity Creek. The silver mine that had given the town its name was nearly depleted, and two factions had formed: those who wanted to invest in cattle ranching, and those who believed the future lay in farming. Hannah found herself alone in a town suddenly alive with suspicion. Some whispered that the fire might have been set by the ranching faction to intimidate Reverend Parker, who had vocally supported the farmers' rights to fence their land. Wyatt stayed in town, sending word to his outfit to proceed without him for a few days. He found Hannah sitting on a bench outside the general store, staring at a list of supplies she couldn't afford. "Thought you might need these," he said, setting down a package beside her. Inside were a simple dress, a shawl, and some basic necessities. Hannah looked up, startled. "Mr. Reeves, I can't accept. You said you'd repay me," he reminded her with a half-smile. "I'm just adding to the tally." She fingered the fabric of the dress. It was plain but well made. "How did you know my size?" "I described you to Mrs. Hollister. She helped me pick it out." He sat beside her, his long legs stretched out before him. "I heard talk in the saloon last night. Some folks think that fire wasn't an accident." Hannah's hands stilled. "The Reverend had enemies." He spoke his mind, especially about the range wars brewing. "Where is the Reverend now?" "Visiting his sister in Helena. He left me to watch over things." Her voice broke. "I've done a poor job of it." Wyatt's hand covered hers briefly. "No one could have prevented this, Mrs. Dawson." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion down the street. A group of men on horseback had ridden into town, led by a hard-faced individual Hannah recognized as Vernon Stokes, the largest cattle rancher in the territory. "Trouble," Wyatt muttered, standing to place himself slightly in front of Hannah. Stokes dismounted and strode toward the sheriff's office, his men following. He spotted Wyatt and changed direction, his eyes narrowed. "Well, if it isn't Wyatt Reeves," Stokes called. "Thought you were riding for the Circle M these days." "I am," Wyatt confirmed, his posture relaxed but alert. "Funny coincidence, you being in town the night the church burns." Stokes's voice carried, drawing attention from passers-by. "Especially since your boss and I have had our disagreements about trail access." Hannah stood, indignation overcoming her caution. "Mr. Reeves saved my life during that fire, Mr. Stokes. He pulled me from the church steps when no one else noticed I was there." Stokes looked at Hannah, really seeing her for the first time. "Widow Dawson, my condolences on your loss, both your husband and now your home." His tone softened slightly. "But you should be careful about the company you keep. The Circle M isn't known for its peaceful ways." "Neither are you," Wyatt replied evenly, "but I don't recall accusing you of arson without evidence." The tension between the men was palpable. Sheriff Ellis emerged from his office, attracted by the gathering crowd. "Something I can help with, gentlemen?" he asked, his hand resting casually near his gun. Stokes backed down, though his eyes remained cold. "Just having a friendly chat, Sheriff. Widow Dawson here seems to have found herself a protector." After Stokes and his men moved on, Wyatt turned to Hannah. "I should explain. My outfit, the Circle M, has been in a dispute with Stokes over water rights. Nothing violent, but there's no love lost." "Do you think he set the fire?" Hannah asked. Wyatt shook his head. Stokes is a hard man, but church burning isn't his style. He's too concerned with his reputation. Sheriff Ellis approached them. Hannah, the town council's meeting this afternoon to discuss rebuilding the church. They'd like you to attend, being the Reverend's assistant and all. The meeting was contentious. Without the moderating presence of Reverend Parker, old rivalries surfaced. Some wanted to rebuild immediately, others suggested waiting until spring. The cost was debated, as was the location. Through it all, Hannah sat quietly, feeling increasingly invisible despite being the only one who had lost her home. Wyatt waited outside, and when Hannah emerged, her face drawn with exhaustion, he offered his arm. "Let me walk you back to the boarding house." As they walked, Hannah confessed, "I feel so useless. They talked about the church as if it were just a building. To me, it was." She trailed off, unable to articulate all the church had meant to her. "The heart of your world," Wyatt finished for her. Hannah looked up at him in surprise. "Yes, exactly. How did you know?" "My mother felt that way about our little church in Missouri. After my father died, that place became her anchor." For the first time, Hannah saw Wyatt not just as her rescuer, but as someone with his own history, his own losses. "Is your mother still there?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, she passed 5 years ago. That's when I headed west." They had reached the boarding house, but neither seemed eager to part. They sat on the porch steps, watching as the town settled into evening. "What will you do now?" Wyatt asked. Hannah sighed. "I don't know. I have some skills I can sew, teach children, keep accounts." "But opportunities for widows are limited, especially here. You could leave," Wyatt suggested. "Start fresh somewhere." "With what? I have nothing but the clothes you bought me." He hesitated. "My outfit is always looking for a good cook for the trail. It's hard work, but it pays." Hannah laughed for the first time since the fire. "Mr. Reeves, are you suggesting I become a chuck wagon cook for a cattle drive?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Why not? You'd be treated with respect, and you'd see some country." The idea was absurd, yet strangely appealing. "I've never been more than 20 miles from Prosperity Creek," she admitted. "Then maybe it's time." The next day, Wyatt received a telegram from his trail boss, indicating the herd was making good time and would reach Prosperity Creek sooner than expected. Meanwhile, Hannah met with Reverend Parker's lawyer, who informed her that the church's insurance would cover rebuilding, but it would take months, and there was no provision for her interim housing or employment. As she left the lawyer's office, she spotted Wyatt in deep conversation with Sheriff Ellis. Their expressions were grave, and when Wyatt saw her, he quickly ended the discussion and came to her side. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Let's talk somewhere private," he suggested, guiding her toward the small town park. Once seated on a bench beneath an elm tree, Wyatt didn't mince words. The sheriff found evidence that the fire was definitely set intentionally. Coal oil was used as an accelerant. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "Who would do such a thing?" "That's not all," Wyatt continued. "There was a message nailed to a tree behind the church. It mentioned you specifically." Fear gripped Hannah's heart. "Me, but why?" It said the widow should have burned with her husband's memory. "The sheriff thinks someone has a grudge against you, not just the church." Hannah's mind raced. "I can't think of anyone who would wish me harm. I've led a quiet life, especially since Thomas died." "What did your husband do? Could it be connected to him?" Thomas was the town's accountant. "He kept books for most of the businesses, including the mine before it declined." A thought struck her. He did mention some discrepancies in the mine's ledgers shortly before he fell ill, but surely that couldn't be related to this. Wyatt looked thoughtful. "Maybe, maybe not. But I don't like the idea of you staying here unprotected while someone's making threats." "What choice do I have? My offer still stands. The cattle drive will be here tomorrow. You could join us when we move on." Hannah stood and paced before him, her mind in turmoil. "Leave everything I know." "Travel with strangers. It seems so drastic." "More drastic than someone burning down your home and threatening your life?" Wyatt asked gently. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Stokes and 2 of his men. The rancher looked smug as he approached. "Mrs. Dawson, Sheriff Ellis mentioned you might be in need of employment. I have a position available at my ranch house. My housekeeper could use an assistant." Hannah was surprised by the offer. "That's very kind, Mr. Stokes, but I'd provide room and board, of course, and a small salary." "You'd be well protected at the ranch." Wyatt's expression had hardened. "Convenient timing, Stokes." The rancher's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just being neighborly, Reeves. Unlike some, I take care of the people in my territory." "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Stokes," Hannah said diplomatically. "May I have time to consider it, of course. But don't take too long. I'm heading back to the ranch tomorrow afternoon." After Stokes left, Wyatt didn't hide his skepticism. "I wouldn't trust that man as far as I could throw him." "You're biased because he's your employer's rival," Hannah pointed out. "Maybe, but it's mighty peculiar that he's suddenly offering you a job right after the sheriff discovers someone threatened you specifically." That evening, Hannah couldn't sleep. She kept weighing her options, limited as they were. Stay in a town where someone wanted her gone, possibly dead, accept a position with a man Wyatt clearly distrusted, or take a leap into the unknown with a cattle drive. Dawn found her still awake when a commotion erupted outside. Hannah threw a shawl over her nightgown and hurried to the window. A group of riders was gathering in the street, with Sheriff Ellis at their center. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Mrs. Hollister was already up, peering through the front window. "There's been trouble at the old mine," she told Hannah. "Someone broke in overnight and shot the caretaker." Hannah's blood ran cold. The mine was where Thomas had found those discrepancies. "Is the caretaker alive?" "Barely." "They've taken him to Doc Wilson's." Without thinking, Hannah rushed out and across the street to the doctor's small office. Sheriff Ellis was just leaving. "Hannah, this isn't a place for you right now," he said, trying to block her way. "Sheriff, I need to know, does this have anything to do with the church fire? With the threat against me?" Ellis's expression confirmed her fears before he spoke. The caretaker regained consciousness briefly. He said the men who shot him were looking for ledgers. Thomas's ledgers. Hannah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "I have those ledgers. After Thomas died, I packed away his papers. They're in a trunk I stored at the church." Wyatt appeared at her side, having heard the commotion. "A trunk that's now ashes, I'm guessing," she nodded, her mind racing. "Unless." "Thomas always kept copies. He was meticulous that way." She looked up at Wyatt, hope dawning. "There might be duplicates in the bank vault. Thomas rented a small box there." Sheriff Ellis looked grim. "We need to check that vault immediately." "If someone's willing to shoot a man and burn a church for those ledgers, they won't stop now." At the bank, the manager was reluctant to open early, but the sheriff's badge convinced him. Hannah provided the key Thomas had left her, and soon they were examining the contents of the small safe deposit box. "Here they are," Hannah said, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. "This is Thomas's personal copy." Wyatt looked over her shoulder as she flipped through the pages. "Can you understand what he recorded?" Hannah nodded. "Thomas taught me his system. I helped him sometimes." Her finger traced down columns of numbers, stopping at notations marked in red. "These are the discrepancies he found. Money being diverted from the mine's profits before the shareholders were paid." Sheriff Ellis leaned closer. "Any indication of who was responsible?" Hannah turned more pages, then stopped abruptly. "Oh my." She looked up, her face pale. It was Vernon Stokes. He was siphoning funds through a dummy corporation. She pointed to a note in Thomas's careful handwriting. "V.S. using Blue Mesa Holdings to divert approx. $5,000 monthly." "That explains why he was so eager to get you to his ranch," Wyatt said grimly. "He wanted to keep you close while he searched for these ledgers." The bank door burst open and Stokes himself entered, flanked by 3 armed men. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," he said coldly. Sheriff Ellis drew his weapon. "Stay right there, Stokes. You're wanted for questioning in the shooting of Ben Taylor and the burning of the church." Stokes laughed. "You can't prove anything, Ellis, and even if you could, you're outnumbered." Wyatt had positioned himself in front of Hannah, his hand on his holster. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." The standoff was broken by the sound of horses outside. Through the window, Hannah could see a group of cowboys dismounting men wearing the Circle M brand that Wyatt had described. "My outfit arrived a bit early," Wyatt said with a tight smile. "And they don't take kindly to finding their scout in trouble." Stokes's confidence wavered, but he wasn't ready to surrender. "This doesn't change anything. The widow has something of mine and I want it back." "These ledgers belong to the mine's shareholders," Hannah said, finding her voice. "And they prove you've been stealing from them for years. Your husband should have minded his own business," Stokes spat, "just like you should have burned with those ledgers." His admission hung in the air as Sheriff Ellis stepped forward. "That's enough to arrest you for, Stokes. Drop your weapons, all of you." For a tense moment, Hannah thought Stokes would order his men to fight. But with Wyatt's outfit surrounding the bank and the sheriff's gun steady, Stokes finally raised his hands in surrender. "This isn't over," he warned as Ellis handcuffed him. "Yes, it is," Wyatt replied. "For you, anyway." In the aftermath, Hannah found herself the center of attention as the town learned how her husband had uncovered Stokes's embezzlement and how she had preserved the evidence that brought him down. The mine's remaining shareholders voted to reopen operations with honest management, and several offered Hannah positions managing their accounts. But as the town celebrated Stokes's arrest and began rebuilding the church, Hannah felt strangely disconnected from it all. She found Wyatt packing his saddlebags outside the boarding house 2 days later. "You're leaving," she said, not a question but a statement of fact. He nodded. "The herd can't wait. We've got contracts to fulfill." Hannah took a deep breath. "I've been offered 3 different positions in town." "Everyone's being so kind now. That's good, you deserve it." Wyatt secured his bedroll to his saddle, his movements efficient. "The thing is," Hannah continued, "I'm not sure I want to stay." When Wyatt looked at her questioningly, she explained, "This town will always see me as Thomas's widow now. The brave woman who helped catch Stokes. But is that all I am? All I'll ever be?" Wyatt's expression softened. "What do you want to be, Hannah?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and it felt right. "I want to be more than my past. I want to see those places you talked about. I want." She hesitated, then finished honestly, "I want to find out who I am when I'm not defined by loss." Wyatt stepped closer. "The trail is hard. The work is harder. I'm stronger than I look, and I make excellent biscuits." A slow smile spread across his face. "The outfit could use someone who can keep accounts as well as cook. Trail bosses are notoriously bad with figures." "Is that a job offer, Mr. Reeves?" "It could be. Or it could be something else entirely." His eyes held hers, conveying more than his words. "I've known you less than a week, Hannah Dawson, but I can't imagine riding away without you." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Hannah felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or grief, a sensation she had thought lost to her forever. "I would need my own tent," she said practically, though her heart was racing, "of course. And I expect to be paid the same as any other cook." "Naturally." "And I can't promise." She faltered, uncertain how to express her hesitation. Wyatt took her hand gently. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see where the trail leads us." Hannah looked around at the town that had been her entire world. The church would be rebuilt, life would go on, but something in her had changed the night she stood watching the flames. Perhaps it had been preparing her for this moment, the courage to step beyond the familiar into a new beginning. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Noon," Wyatt replied. "Just time enough to settle your affairs." There wasn't much to settle. Hannah visited Reverend Parker's lawyer to sign over her claim to any compensation from the church fire to the rebuilding fund. She said goodbye to Mrs. Hollister, who surprised her with a sturdy traveling dress and practical boots. Sheriff Ellis gave her a small revolver, insisting the trail was no place for an unarmed woman. By noon, she was mounted on a gentle mare Wyatt had procured for her, her few possessions packed in saddlebags, facing the open country beyond Prosperity Creek's Main Street. "Having second thoughts?" Wyatt asked, bringing his horse alongside hers. Hannah looked at him, this man who had pulled her from the flames in more ways than one, and felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since before Thomas fell ill. "Not a single one," she replied. They rode out together, joining the cattle drive heading north. Behind them, Prosperity Creek grew smaller until it disappeared beyond a bend in the trail. Ahead lay mountains and rivers Hannah had only heard about, towns she'd never seen, and a future unwritten by expectations or the past. That night, camped beneath stars brighter than she'd ever noticed before, Hannah stood at the edge of the firelight watching Wyatt speak with his trail boss. He caught her eye and smiled, excusing himself to join her. "How are you finding trail life so far?" he asked. "Dusty," she admitted with a laugh. "But good, different, free," he nodded in understanding. "Freedom can be addictive, fair warning." "So can certain cowboys," she said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. In the firelight, his eyes darkened. "Hannah, I meant what I said. No expectations, no promises required. What if I want to make one?" She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Not a promise about forever, I've learned how fragile those can be, but a promise about now, about not being afraid to feel again." Wyatt's hand came up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "I think that's a promise we can both make." When he kissed her, it wasn't like the desperate embrace of that first night when he'd pulled her from the burning church. It was something new, tender, yet passionate, speaking of possibilities rather than endings. Hannah closed her eyes and leaned into it, feeling not like a widow being rescued, but like a woman choosing her own path forward. The trail ahead would be long, the journey challenging in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But as Wyatt's arms encircled her beneath the vast Montana sky, Hannah knew she had found something she thought lost forever in the flames: the courage to begin again and a heart ready to love once more.